want to forget that. All right, so we're recording now. So if you have a question about anything at any time, feel free to use the chat. Periodically, I will check the chat to make sure that there, to see if there's any questions. But it's we can't be as interactive, but I do want to encourage you to use the chat for any questions. Or if you want to email me, then my email will be at the end of this presentation, and you can also email me any questions that you have. The slide deck will be available, and the recording will be available as well at the end of the session. So I will send that to you all after you have to do something for me to send you the slide deck, which is the evaluation, and I'll talk a little bit about how important evaluation is throughout the evening. So again, welcome to Grant Writing 101. My name is Omi Pennick, and I created this program called GrantMasters for Developing Solutions Consulting Agency. We are actually a 10-year-old organization. We're based out of Atlanta, Georgia. We help small businesses and nonprofits. We help them with development mostly. So resource development, communication development, organizational development, and program development are our specialties. So we've been working with nonprofit organizations, government agencies for about 10 years or so. And last year we created a program called GrantMasters. The majority of our work is done in grant writing. And so I'll tell you a little bit about why we created the program in a second, but we created this program basically so that we can help to create sustainable organizations and institutions across the nation. So we've been helping a lot of organizations to grow and to grow their resources through grant writing and through development. But of course, you can't help everybody. So we needed to come up with another way to be able to reach more people, and GrantMasters is it. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about me. I'm a whole bunch of things. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm definitely a community activist. I'm also a fashion designer. I have a clothing line called EY. I love giving back. So I'm a philanthropist. I've been a consultant for a number of years and had this business for 10. I do a lot of fundraisers, and I'm a grant writer. So a lot of my time is spent writing grants. And again, in order to do some of the other things that I love doing with my life, we created this program so that we can teach other people how to write grants. And these free webinars are a part of the GrantMasters program. We wanted to be able to, again, I said I'm a philanthropist, so we want to be able to give back to the community, right? A lot of people all the time, they ask, like, how do I write grants? Where do I start? This is something that I've always wanted to do. Whether they wanted to do it for money, you know what I mean, to be able to write grants for other people, or whether they had their own nonprofit organization and they wanted to be able to increase the profits for their organization. So just a couple of fun facts, right? There's like 700 billion grants and cooperative agreements. So there's the difference between grants and cooperative agreements. Cooperative agreements are more like contracts, whether or not they be government contracts or corporate contracts, where you say that you're going to do something in specific. And if you don't, then you have to give the money back. A grant is where you do not have to give the money back, but you usually do have to give an explanation for why you didn't do what you said you were going to do, right? But it's important that you are always able to narrate. The narrative is what's most important in grant writing. So there's $700 billion across who knows how many organizations, right? There's also $410 billion in individual, foundation, and corporation grants. So there's a lot of money that is out there for non-profit organizations, for individuals, and mostly our focus is on nonprofit organizations, organizations that have their nonprofit status, their 501c3 status with the IRS. That's the majority of people that we work with, but we have worked with artists and people before who are just starting out. Either they want to get their 501c3 or they have no interest in getting a nonprofit, but they still may need a grant. It's harder to get a grant as an individual, but it is possible. But a lot of who we work with is nonprofits. And so again, we created these webinars to be able to give back to the community, to make sure that we were indeed doing what we said we were going to do. In addition to the program itself, we know that everybody doesn't always, you know, have the time to commit to a program or the resources to commit to a program. But we wanted to make sure that some of the information is still getting out and that we're able to build the capacity of those people who are really interested in writing grants. So really, the whole program is about building capacity. So tonight is very special because this is the first night. We've done, this might be our 5th webinar now. And on each webinar, I have shown this slide, but I've never gone into the actual pieces and parts of the proposal. So if you're interested in seeing any of our previous webinars, most of them are on the website. It's www.dscallc.net. There's a library with some older webinars on them that you can go to. But tonight I'm going to take a roundabout, I'm going to take a way around this circle, and I'm going to talk about each of the parts of a grant proposal. Now, every proposal is different. You're going to follow something called a request for proposal or a RFP, right? And the RFP will tell you exactly what you're supposed to write, how you're supposed to write it, when it's due. It's going to give you all of the information. What I'm about to give you tonight is basically the generic template for a grant. For all intents and purposes, most grant applications have these sections. And one of the things that we like to teach is we like to tell people that they should prepare their grant prior to reading an RFP. Prior to reading a proposal of any kind, a request for proposal, you want to have your information ready. So we use these pieces and parts as boilerplate for you to be able to create boilerplate language for your organization or your project. So there's 8 pieces and parts. There's 8 parts of the grant application. There's the abstract, there's the organizational profile, there's the background and understanding, there's the program approach, there's the goals and objectives, there's the evaluation section, which a lot of people tend to run from. And we want to teach everyone not to run from the evaluation section. It's a very important section of the grant. There's the project management section, and then there's the budget section, and the budget narrative. They usually go together. So I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes or so going through each section. And again, if you have any questions at any time, please use the chat. I'm going to try to pull it up now to make sure that I can see it. So yeah, just put your, let me know if you have a question in the chat. It should buzz and I should be able to see it, but I will come back to your questions. And also, again, if you're just getting on, we are going to have the slides available. The recording will be available also at the end. So you feel free to listen, take down some notes, and let me know if you have any questions. All right. So the first section of the grant application is the abstract. This is where you're going to give a basic overview of your proposal. Now, this piece goes first, but it's actually the section that you write last. And you write it last because it basically takes pieces and parts of each of the sections and puts them together. So you're going to put parts of the organizational profile together, parts of the program approach together, parts of the goals and objectives portion together, and basically give a summation. Usually this is like no more than 1 page or so. So this part of the application, it addresses the who, what, the where. Again, it's a synopsis. It's a quick synopsis. So you want to be able to talk about the organization that's applying, a brief paragraph or so about the organization that's applying, and like talk about who the organization is, maybe give the mission statement. You're going to give this information again, but you want the person, the reader of your abstract, to be able to get the gist of what your grant is about just from reading your abstract. Sometimes the abstract is also called the executive summary. So there's different names for different parts. You're also going to talk about what are you planning to do with the funds. Another brief paragraph on the goals and objectives, exactly what you're trying to accomplish, and then what strategies you're going to use. In this paragraph, you're also probably going to talk about important partners. And I stress important partners, right? Because you might have tons of partners as a part of your grant, but really people that are essential to your program. You want to be able to name them in your abstract. And then you want to give a summation paragraph that just kind of lists how much money you're applying for, as well as any plans that you might have for dissemination. Yep. So Iris says it sounds a little bit like a business plan. So yes, we write business plans also. So yes, this section, the executive summary, that there's usually a summation before. Now this part is, again, it's important. The abstract is important because for some people, they're going to read your abstract first to make sure that you even qualify for the grant, right? To make sure that you even, what you're writing about, what's in, like you might have spent 10 pages, 20 pages, 50 pages explaining your entire program. In that abstract, you want to make sure you nail exactly what it is and make sure you get to the good stuff so that your reader knows what they're reading, and you want to entice them to be able to read more. One of the things that we teach at GrantMasters is that, you know, grants is just really about telling a good story. You're telling a great story about why you need funding to basically make a really great impact in your community. So your abstract is your first shot at doing that. All right, so the next section is the organizational profile. So I'm putting this in order of how it should go. Remember, I said the abstract goes first, but you write it last because you're going to flush through your entire program before writing your abstract. Your organizational profile is, you're going to tell a little bit of history and experience of the organization. It answers the question like, why is this organization even qualified to receive funding? You're going to give any relevant organizational experience, especially to the project that you're trying to do. If your organization has programs, you know, different programs that may not be related to the program you're describing, then you want to be able to tell them what those programs are, because that really speaks to capacity, right? To your organization's capacity to be able to do what they say they're going to do. You're going to give a brief history about the organization. Who founded the organization? Why was the organization founded? What's the mission of the organization? Do you have any value statements that are associated with the organization? And then you're going to talk also about the target population. The target population is very, very important, of course, because that talks about who, right? Who does your organization serve? Now, again, this is the organizational profile. This is not just talking about the program that you're describing. You want to be able to talk about the organization in totality, what it's accomplished. You might even give some of its key accomplishments, you know, over the last couple of years. If you're a relatively new organization and you haven't done a whole lot, so maybe you don't have a lot of relevant experience yet, then maybe you want to talk about partnerships, collaborations that you have. But it's always a good idea. One of the things that I say when grant writing or when program planning is you want to be able to talk about the moving train, right? You don't want an organization or a funder to think that you're just waiting on their dollars to be able to do what you said you're going to do. You want them to know that they are getting on a moving train. So hopefully you haven't been waiting for a funder to fund you, but you've been trying to gain some experience, even if your organization is new. You always want to be able to talk about what your organization has done, and the organizational profile is the space to do that. So you see on the bottom, these are kind of like the four general areas: the mission statement, the target population, the program overview if your organization has more than one program, and then organizational experience. All right, this is one of the, now all of the sections are important, but I'm highlighting this section as one of the most important, right? And probably program approach and evaluation also being one of the most important, because these sections usually weigh the most. This is the section, your background and understanding. Sometimes it's called a statement of need, or your need statement, or your problem statement, depending on what the RFP says. But this is where you're going to explore your why. Why does your program even exist? Why should we even care? What is the story behind why you are writing this grant and who it's going to help? So the reason that this section is very important is that it has to be supported by evidence. You know, you can't just say, you know, obesity is a problem in the African American community, and we need to be able to, you know, decrease the weight of young people between the ages of 13 to 18. You have to tell me why. You have to tell me why it's important. Give me some statistics, data. Usually you want to give national data as well as local data. So if you are an Atlanta-based organization, you want to be able to place Atlanta inside the national statistics. So you need to be able to look at national statistics and where Atlanta falls in place within those national statistics. So you have to support all your statements by data and references. I typically write this section first. The reason why is because, again, remember, we're telling a story. If I can get to the core and always remember, now let me back up. I said I write this section first. It's not the first thing that I do. I'll tell you what the first thing that we do is. But it is the section that I write first after I create a logic model. And I'll talk a little bit about what a logic model is. In our next webinar, I think might even be, we might go into logic models more. But I typically write this section first because I want to get to the why. I want to do my research. I want to look at the data, make sure that whatever it is that we think is substantiated by data. So it shows the reader that you really have an understanding of the environment, and you have the knowledge to help make whatever problem it is you're trying to solve better. And again, you want to support, I can't say this enough, an empirical data. That means numbers, figures, tables, looking at surveillance data from, the state, looking at anecdotal stories. We also think, anecdotal stories are also really great data as well. If you've been working in the community and you have a great story to tell and you've been working with people, data can come in the form of storytelling, if you tell how you helped a person. So this is a very, very important part that talks about the why of your program. And again, as we go through, if there's any questions, just, feel free to log in on the chat. So the program approach, again, another very, very important section. The program approach gives the roadmap of your program itself. Now, remember I mentioned the logic model. I don't have a whole scheme for logic models here, or have the 5 parts of the logic model here. If I mentioned earlier that if you go back to previous webinars, which are all on our website, I talk a little bit about logic models, and there's a slide in just about all of those previous webinars that talks about what pieces and parts of the logic model are. But the logic model is basically a 1-page roadmap of your organization from beginning to end, starting with the end. So we start our logic model with the end, which are the outcomes. I'm going to talk about what the outcomes are in a minute. But your program approach, it asks the question, or it answers the question, what strategies will actually lead to the goals? What am I actually going to do? What are the activities that I'm going to do? What's going to be implemented with the target population to be able to bring about the change that I said I'm going to make? This is also another space where you're going to use evidence, theory, or evidence-based elements of your program. There's a lot of different theories. They can be educational theories, they can be psychological theories, sociological theories, but you have to, it's a very good idea to base your program approach in evidence. Again, if you want to get the eye of a funder and you want a funder to be able to write you a check, then you have to be able to show that you have the information to really look at why you're doing what you're doing and how you're doing what you're doing and how your steps are going to lead to the specific outcomes that you're talking about. So you want to show the reader that you understand the specifics of your approach and how you're going to get from point A to point B. And we start, like I said, we start with the logic model so that you can see from the beginning, what are my outcomes? What are my goals? What are my activities? What are my measures? How am I going to measure that? And then how much money do I need? What inputs do I need to be able to get there? So that's a 1 sheet of paper. That's the logic model. And then this section also reflects needing a work plan. So there's a hand raised. If you have a question, it might be, because I can't take anybody off of mute. The whole, it's muted. So if you wouldn't mind answering your question, hold on. I'm seeing if I can get to Iris's raised hand. Iris, is it possible to type your question in the chat? Okay. So if you type your question in the chat, then I can see it and I can read it without taking everybody on mute. Because we are recording, sometimes there's a lot of background noise whenever I take people off of mute. So if you do have a question, I think 2 people had a question or raised their hand. So if you raised your hand, just put your question inside the chat and I'll be happy to answer it that way. Can you give us more instructions on how to track results? Absolutely. So in the evaluation section, I could talk about that a little bit more. So we have some novices on, people that don't know, anything about grant writing in specific, and then we might have some people who have a little bit more information about grants. But when we get to the evaluation section, then I can talk a little bit more about collecting data, because that's a space where you're going to collect data and also track, so that's where you might track your results. But that's very, very important. So that's kind of why also, Iris, why we talk about starting with the logic model, because the logic model, it's a very good tool also for evaluation. It lets you lay out your entire program from beginning to end. And again, it's a huge part of how I write grants. I start in that space. So I start with my logic model, and then I go to, which looks at my outputs, looks at my outcomes, looks at exactly what I want to result. And then I can build my evaluation plan from there, which will help me to create data tools or tools that I will use to collect data that would help me to track my results. So that's a really great question. I feel like somebody else had a question. Stephanie had a question. In this section, is this section similar to the method section? This is the method section. So if you are, and usually this word methods, it may usually apply to like the research methods, right? Is what people usually think about. So if you have worked in research before, or if you worked in that area before, then you're probably used to it sounding more like methodology, but it's kind of like the step-by-step approach that you're going to use. So whether you call it, each section will be called something different. You might get some RFPs that call it the method. But for the most part, I do a lot of community work. So, if you're working with a lot of more corporate organizations or community-based foundations, or even the government, a lot of times, it's going to have program approach or strategies used, or a strategic approach to to the program itself. Whenever I've seen methods, then I'm usually looking at a research-based grant. So, but it just depends. But that's also a great question, Stephanie. So again, any questions that you guys have, do just that. You can raise your hand and type it in, or you can just type it in the chat and then I can see it that way. Awesome question. So I think I did mention the work plan. The work plan is a supporting document to your program plan. It's a tabular form. In GrantMasters, we give a lot of templates to be able to use for your logic model, your work plan, that type of thing, so that you can look at everything that needs to happen, who's responsible for doing it, and what the outcomes are associated with that task, and to answer you, Iris, how we're tracking it. What data tools are we going to be able to use to track that specific outcome? All right, so the goals and objectives section, this talks about, it's usually a shorter section, but you would have gotten to this first because, again, we recommend that this is where you start, right? You would start with your logic model, and then you would look at the measures that you're trying to, like, what are you trying to measure? What are you trying to, how do you know that your program worked? What measures specific numbers, whether they be qualitative, it can be qualitative or quantitative, right? So quantitative is more numbers, and then qualitative is looking more at like how things happened, being able to look at process itself. But how are you going to measure your program? So there's 3 definitions that I want to give here. There's the goals, there's the outcomes, and there's the outputs. All of these are in your logic model. Your goal is the overarching thing that you're trying to accomplish. Usually answers the question like, at the end of this program, when all is said and done, what is the long range overarching benefit of your program? And you're going to see me write program or organization because sometimes people are writing grants that are organization specific, so they might be writing for general support. Majority of the time, we're writing for program support. General operating grants are small and far and in between. They're absolutely, you can get them, they do exist, but the likelihood, majority of you, if you're writing for a 501c3, you're going to be writing majority program specific grants. So you might see that a lot. I say either program or your organization. But the long range overarching benefit is the goal. Now your outcome objective. This is the measurable aim. When I say measurable aim, that means that you can tell whether you went from here to there. It's usually defined, when I define a measure, then I am defining usually a value, right? An increase in this, a decrease in that. So it's usually of measurable proportion that's achieved throughout the course of the program. So when we think of outcome objective, you're thinking knowledge, skill, behavior. What knowledge was increased? What did you increase their skill? Did they improve upon a behavior? For a number of years, I've worked with an organization here in Atlanta. They do HIV education, mostly in African American women. You know, they're constantly looking at, you know, knowledge of HIV and STD facts, skills, whether or not women can put on a condom, and, you know, be able to do that to various degrees. And behavior, are they willing to use condoms more? Are they willing to talk to their partners more about, you know, their sexual usage of condoms, that type of thing. So again, knowledge, skills, behavior, that's usually related to outcome. And your there's another objective called a process objective. And a process objective just tells whether or not something happened or not, right? Did we actually have the number of classes that we said we were going to have? Did we actually do what we said we were going to do, or did that not happen? So a process is actually looking at the implementation itself, and objective is actually looking at knowledge, skill, and behavior. And that becomes really, really important when you start talking about evaluation. And then the last definition, I see somebody has a question, is the output. So the output is the specific number or value associated with the objective. So you said you were going to do 8 classes. Did you do 8 classes? You said you were going to decrease by 80%. Did you decrease by 80%? The output is the actual number itself. I mean, that is awesome. Okay, that wasn't a question. It was more of a comment. So we do have an HIV educator on that. So it is awesome. Yes. So you might be familiar with that organization. It's Sister Love Incorporated. They're here in Atlanta. I've worked with them for a number of years and write majority of their grants. Okay, so that's section 5. We have 3 more sections. How am I doing on time? I'm doing pretty good on time. All right, the project management section. This section outlines the individuals that will be implementing the program and the ones that will basically be responsible for ensuring that the program goes well. Who's supervising the program? What qualifications do they have? And you want to give previous experience, especially as it relates to the program itself. So it's going to show the capacity for them being able to implement the work. Again, who's managing it? Do you have a program director? Do you have a project coordinator? Those are usually the 2, you know, ones that you see. You might see an executive director on there for a certain percentage, maybe a deputy director on there for a certain percentage. There might be giving high level supervision. And then you may have a project director, and then you may have a program coordinator, and then everybody else falls underneath that management, right? You might have facilitators that are falling underneath the management, or surveyors, data intakers, just depending on what your program looks like. You want to talk about the qualifications of the people that are managing. Sometimes in this section, they'll ask for everybody, right? They'll say, just give me everybody's resume, or give me a short bio on everybody that's working on the project. That's possible. But for the most part, you know, you're going to be looking at the managers, the people that are going to be overseeing the project, and the people that are going to be responsible at the end of the day. Who are those people? What are their qualifications? What have they done before? Have they worked with grants before? You want to be able to talk all about that. You want to be able to have their resumes and a short bio handy. If you are writing grants for an organization, these are things that you want to already have before you start looking at anybody's RFP, before you start looking at a request for proposal. Ask for managers' resumes. Ask for bios, short bios, just no more than a paragraph that outlines who they are, what their qualifications are. And then you want to make sure you may have different ones for different projects depending on skill sets, because for a lot of these grants, sometimes you have a finite number of words. You can't go on and on and on and on. Sometimes you can. You have 50 pages of information. But lately, a lot of these things are online. A lot of these, there's an online form that you fill out. You fill out the online form, and then, you upload supporting data and supporting documents. And so with those online forms, you have a finite amount of words. You got 250 characters. You have 500 words. That's all you have. So you want to be able to do that relatively concisely, and that's with everything. And then lastly, you want to talk about quality assurance measures that you might have in place to ensure that the project is being managed well. And when I talk about quality assurance, then I'm talking about, are you meeting with staff on a regular basis? Are you evaluating staff? Are you doing site visits? Like, what types of things are you putting in place that will help manage the project? So there's a question. Is this where the conflict resolution example go? I think that's what it's called. Conflict, you might have to tell me more, Iris. Conflict resolution. I'm thinking, so like if there was a conflict with staff, sometimes, I've only think I've seen this maybe in like larger government grants, and you can tell me if that's what you're talking about, because they might have like a section that may need to be written. It's not always, but they might want you to be able to talk about how you might deal with conflict within the program. That might be a separate question. Again, what we're going over here tonight, so that would probably be RFP specific if they did ask for that. For the most part tonight, what we're going over are the basic parts of like all grant applications, right? All grant applications usually have these 8 sections. Depending on the RFP itself or the request for applications itself, then they may have specific questions. So I think I have seen conflict resolution type things. And this is where that is a quality assurance measure usually, to make sure that you have a plan in place already for if there's conflict within your staff members or conflict within your project, how are you going to deal with that? So yeah, if that was a part of it, then that, if you do want to include verbiage like that, this might be a good place for it to go. Let me know if that answers your question. All right, section 8. And this is the last section. This is another section that people, I think I skipped this section. I don't remember. I think I skipped the section. I didn't do the evaluation section. When I saw the budget section, I realized I skipped one, so I'm sorry. Because this is a very important section. The evaluation section is where people tend to get very, very clammy and very, very, tight. Because there are people who have whole degrees and spend their entire, graduate career focused on evaluation, focused on research. You do not have to be a researcher to put together an evaluation plan. Okay, all you have to do is have a clear understanding of what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then look at what data you can collect to be able to accomplish that task. So this asks the question, how will you know that your program worked? For a lot of people, prior to them working with a development person, they're just like, you're writing a grant and you're like, hey, I know that this is going to work and I haven't collected any data yet, and I have this curriculum that I created for girls, and I think that it's great, and it's going to give people empowerment. It's going to empower girls to take better care of themselves, to be healthy, and to eat right. But they've never tested it. No one's ever seen it, and they have no idea whether or not it's going to make the impact that they said it's going to make. Your evaluation plan and you being able to base, remember I was talking about theory and evidence-based programming. When you use evidence-based programming, then there's certain predictions that you can make associated with your outcomes, right? So all those things go together. So in this section, it's going to outline the actual protocols that you're going to use to assess whether or not your program worked. a lot of grants require this now, right? Because a funder usually has some type of someone they have to answer to. Someone is writing the foundation a check. Someone is the government is accountable to the money that they said that they were going to utilize and they were going to give. You have to be accountable to doing what you said you were going to do. So there's some, if you have a larger grant, like a government grant, say a grant that's, you know, maybe $50,000 or more, a lot of times, or upwards of $100,000, you're going to have to get with an outside evaluator. Meaning, remember I was talking about those people that have degrees, whole degrees in evaluation? You might have to consult with one of those people to be able to put them on your grant so that they will be an outside evaluator who will evaluate your program without any bias. Because if you created the program, then you might have some bias. But for the most part, for like smaller foundation grants, anything, you know, $50,000 or less, usually you don't have to have an outside evaluator, you just have to have an evaluation plan. There's 3 different types of evaluations. There's formative evaluation, process evaluation, and there's outcome evaluation. The formative evaluation is looking at the steps that you took prior to the program starting. So did you do interviews? Did you do a needs assessment? That's a common one, right? Formative evaluation, and you took a needs assessment, you created a survey, and you went into the target into where the target population is, and you talked to them. You found out what they needed before you created something. Or maybe you created something and you wanted to see if they liked it. So you had focus groups and you tested out your curriculum with these focus groups, or you tested out your messaging. You know, maybe you have a communications campaign and you're doing social media messaging as an HIV educator. And you want to test your messages. You want to do a formative that's a formative evaluation. A focus group is a formative evaluation. So that's usually collecting qualitative data, right? So there's a difference between qualitative and quantitative data. Qualitative data is talking about what is it like, people can tell you how they feel, right? So if I have for instance, if I have an interview, and I saw somebody they raised their hand. So I want to make sure that you remember to put your question inside the chat, okay? Type it in for me because I can't take everybody off of mute. But I want to be able to answer your question. So type your question inside the chat and I'll read it and I'll answer it. So qualitative data. So again, if you were doing a interview and you talk to somebody about what their thoughts or their feelings or their experience is regarding a certain subject, that would be qualitative data. Quantitative data is numerical value, right? Getting a survey to tell if there's 5 out of the 100 people that you talk to, 25% said this, 35% said that. That's more quantitative data. It has to do with the actual numbers, right? And both are very valuable. Qualitative data and quantitative data, very, very, very valuable. You want to be able to distinguish between the both. For formative evaluation, you're going to probably have a lot of qualitative data. You can have quantitative data also if you do a needs assessment, right? So if you did some kind of survey, it would be very easy to get quantitative data. And this is answering your question, Iris, about possible data tools, right? How you can track your information. So let's talk a little bit about process data, right? So if you have process data, remember I was saying a process evaluation is where you're looking at, just like a process outcome, the process evaluation is looking at the actual strategies and what you did from beginning to end to get there. Did you have this many sessions? Did you do what you said you were going to do? Yes or no, right? What was the process that you took to get there? Were there any things that happened along the lines of implementation that disrupted or improved your process? So the ways that you can collect this type of data is through maybe satisfaction surveys. Maybe if you had let's say you had a curriculum that you were teaching, a class that you were teaching, even a webinar like this that you're teaching, at the end of this webinar, I'm going to send you an email that has the evaluation in it. It's going to be mostly process evaluation. I'm going to ask you questions like, you know, did you enjoy the information? Did you learn anything from the information? Did you find the information useful? Will you use the information? All of that is process data, not outcome data, right? Because the outcome of this class, I want to see people, we want to increase the capacity for organizations to be able to get more grants, right? So I'm only going to be able to, I have another tool that I use with the people that are in our class to be able to tell whether or not I've increased their capacity to be able to write grants for themselves. But for the purpose of these webinars, I'm only using process evaluation. So in outcome evaluation, remember that's knowledge, skills, behavior, just like the outcome objectives, knowledge, skills, behavior. That, am I increasing your knowledge? Am I decreasing your ability to do a specific behavior? Am I increasing your skill level? Ways that you can track this data is through pre and post tests or pre and post surveys. You give a survey at the beginning of something, you give a survey at the end of something, and then you compare the data. That would be quantitative data, right? Because you can actually look at numbers in that way. That's one of the most easiest ways to do it. You can also go back to interviewing, talking to people directly and getting some qualitative data on their on those outcomes, and then you can use it in a quantitative way, because if you did a certain number of interviews, then you would actually have numbers to be able to run. So again, you can make evaluation really, really simple. In our class, we use a six-point method to evaluation to be able to teach it very, very easily. And it's an evaluation that's really used in the context of community and community programming and community development, and not so much research-based, because research evaluation can get, you know, you have to have control groups. You have to have, you know, your A and B groups, you're comparing, you know, you might have randomized controlled trials and all this other kind of stuff. So that's really not what we focus on, but you don't have to be so scared of it. You know, we want to really make evaluation normal and encourage you to make sure that that's a really important part of your grant. Okay. So I did talk about project management. I went back to evaluation. So the last section is the budget and the budget narrative. And this looks specifically at how much will it cost to do all of this, right? So we talked about why it's important in your background and understanding. You gave me all the strategies in your program approach. You told me what your goals and objectives are. In your goals and objectives section, you're letting me know what the organization has the capacity to do in your organizational profile. You're letting me know who's going to be supervising everything in your and how you're going to check for quality assurance in your project management section. And now you're going to tell me how much all this costs, right? Because people cost money, strategies cost money, serving the community costs money. And here's where you want to really create basically a cost proposal of what it's going to take to actually implement your project. So you have the budget and the budget narrative. They're both very, very important. The budget is very, very critical. It shows the funder that you have a clear understanding of what it costs. If you write a really great narrative and you don't know how much anything costs and you haven't done any research in terms of your actual costs, you know, you could possibly lose your grant. High chance and high possibility that you could lose your grant. So you want to have an itemized budget, a line itemized budget, and you want to be able to justify each expense and actually show why it's necessary. See, a couple of people have comments, or please explain how new and or startup create a budget. That's a really great question. Okay, so if you're new and you, and do we payroll based on our area? Yes, you payroll based on your area always. You do fringe benefits based on your area. You do taxes, you know, all your FICA and Social Security taxes and based on the federal government. And then you have some other taxes that would be associated with your state. To answer your question, Iris had a question that says, how do new or startups organizations create budgets? So in the beginning or somewhere in there, I was talking about the moving train, right? So funders want to get on a moving train. You don't want the funder to think that you are solely waiting on them. that they are, you know, they are the ones that saved you. You are solely waiting on them to be able to do your programming. I always suggest that you do a pilot, right? As a new organization, run a pilot of whatever it is you said you want to do, and see if you can do it. See if you can do it for a decreased amount of money. It might be something that you have to invest in, but the investment is worth it. One, so that you can collect data. Two, so that you can start to tell your narrative, right? You're telling your narrative based on something you've already done, not something that you're waiting on them to fund. Even if, let's say you had a curriculum that you wanted to test, right? And say the curriculum was for young girls and it was an empowerment program, and you wanted to get funding for this empowerment program. Okay, you want to get funding for the empowerment program. Maybe you should take your curriculum and test it with 5 young girls or 10 young girls, a class, over a 6-week period, right? You've invested something in it. Now you can talk to the funder about what you did, how it impacted these 10 girls that were between the ages of 13 to 17. Now you actually have some real research that you've done on exactly how much things cost. So to answer your question, Iris, you have to do your research, right? Even with a startup, based on what you think, you can look a lot of things up online, right? In terms of budget. But I also suggest that you really, because it's not just money, but it's also time, because time is also money. So you want to be able to talk about how much time is it going to take, and that you have to cost that out. So even when you're doing salaries and you're looking at how much time things take, you want to be able to have a real good idea. And you can't always have as a startup, you don't always know for certain, right? You want to be able to go from what you know, and you only can go from what you know if you've done it before. So running a pilot is a very, very good idea. I hope that answers your question. That was a really, really great question. But research is important. And if you're a startup organization, then you can, hopefully you wouldn't be doing all of that by yourself. Maybe you would have a board that would be able to help you to be able to, do that research and look at those things. Okay, so these are the pieces and parts of the proposal. I have 9 more minutes. So it's the abstract, the organizational profile, background and understanding, program approach, goals and objectives, evaluation, project management, and budget. These are the sections of the grant. And these are actually, somebody else had a question. Yeah, right. So these are the parts, again, they're the pieces and parts of the proposal, but they are the pieces and parts that, for the most part, in every RFP, you're going to see these. Okay, you're going to see the abstract. It may be called executive summary, but it's there. You're going to see project management. It may be called quality assurance, but it's there. You're going to see background and understanding. It may be called the problem statement. It may be called the need statement, but it's there. Okay, so what we recommend is, before you do anything, if you have an organization, you want to make sure that you have, before you write anything or send anything off, you want to perfect these 8 sections. And then it actually makes, if you look at some of our other webinars, it talks about some people want to increase their capacity to do it quicker. When you have these sections already written out, you write them, you can send out grants a whole lot faster, because now you're kind of cutting, pasting, and massaging the language. The language is good. The narrative is good. You've honed in on the narrative. You've collected all of the pieces and parts, all of the documents that you need for your appendix, for your proposal. And it's all sitting in one place, and it's ready to disseminate to your different funders. So with my last little 8 minutes, and please ask questions as we go, I want to tell you a little bit about the GrantMasters program and what it is. It's a 9-session grant training program where we actually basically teach you how to write those 8 sections, right? How to write it. We help you to do your research. We help you to vet the process, and really want to increase your capacity, the capacity of the organization, or the capacity of the person that's writing the grants for the organization, to be able to not only increase the number of grants that go out, because when you increase the number of grants, you also increase the dollar amount, right? So if it's like for me, for instance, as a grant writer, I've been doing this for a while. So as a grant writer, I get 50% of the grants that I write, right? And I've been doing this for 10 years, right? Because there's so many factors that go into you actually receiving funding. So if I know my organization needs $250,000 for their program, then I'm going to write $500,000 worth of grants, and probably more than that, because there's a formula that we use to ensure that we can get to the number that we're very goal oriented here. So if you have $100,000 that you need for your program, we want to make sure that you have that $100,000 and some. Also, we will also wanted to increase or build capacity, build for organizations to collaborate with one another, both locally and nationally, because we find that when organizations collaborate with one another, they accomplish more and they get more done together. And it also builds your capacity to be able to increase your grant fundings. Funders love to see organizations be able to work with one another. So the program is for nonprofit executives, board members, development officers, professional grant writers. There's several people who, always like, well, I would love to do what you do. You know what I mean? How do I make money writing grants? Farmers, we work with artists, with teachers, social entrepreneurs, people who want to volunteer as fundraising, and then there's people who are just serious about grant writing and they want to increase their capacity. Grant writing is a skill, okay? It's a skill. It's actually a really marketable skill. If you can do this, then you definitely can make money from it. It might be your job to write grants and you want to increase your capacity to be able to do it. But even if it is your job and somebody else is paying you to do it, it absolutely is a skill that a marketable skill that you can use as a professional. Just look at me. So we have a class. The next class starts on February 19th. The class is created, the way we created this program is kind of different than your regular grant writing class. A lot of classes, I've been to grant writing classes. I love developing my grant writing skills. So what grant writers usually do if they're teaching a class, they give you the skill. They'll teach you how to write those 8 parts, right? Or maybe 9 parts or 10 parts that they might break it into, and you'll go home. Maybe you'll go home with some templates. Maybe you'll go home with some examples. What we wanted to do a little differently is we want to hold your hand through the process. In capacity building, there's something called technical assistance. And technical assistance is where you really support the person in actually doing what they say they're going to do, right? So we want to hold your hand, build your capacity, and increase your funding and the number of grants you send out for your organization by walking with you through the process. So after you do the 9 videos, there's 9 different videos. Each week you would get another video. You can move at your own pace. There's downloadable templates and tools. You get feedback on your verbiage. So that means you would write a section. So you write your background and understanding section, you send it in, and then we give you feedback on it. We actually grade it like we are a funder. We have a set of criteria. You write to that criteria, we send it back to you and let you know where you need to improve. Our goal is by the end of that 9-week period, you have a completed grant application that is good, that is vetted by professionals, that is ready to go and be shopped. What we then help you do is we will help you create, use one of our tools to be able to create a ask for as many grants really as we can find. And then we would help you to send out those grant applications. And then you stay in the program until you receive funding. So the technical assistance, you participate in that section until you receive funding. So if we are not, like I said, there's so many different factors and variables that go into grant writing. We want to make sure that we're getting it right. And the only way to make sure we get it right is to actually help you along the process, send the grants out with you, wait in that time, send more out. And as soon as you get your first grant funding, then you're done with the program. You have increased your capacity, and you still have access to. We have a lifetime Facebook group where we share grants, we share opportunities. People are networking there. And we have weekly live question and answer sessions so that you can get some of your questions answered, especially as you are writing your proposal. So the next class actually starts on the 19th. Which is next week, Wednesday. We've done something a little bit different starting in January. We have created 3 levels to the class. so that people can, depending on where you are in the process. So you have the 8 online classes. It's 9 modules. Module 0 you do on your own. So it's 9 modules. You get templates, feedback, verbiage, the technical assistance, all of that I was talking about. Level 2, you have the classes and the templates, and you get feedback on your verbiage. We just wouldn't hold your hand through the process of writing the grant, so the guarantee is not there. And then if you're just interested in the classes and the templates, there's level 3. So there's 3 different opportunities for you to participate in the program. Everyone would be a part of the Facebook group. Everyone has the opportunity for networking and receives, the emails on grants and that type of thing. But at each different level, is the guarantee increases for you to be able to actually receive funding. So also, if you're a part of this webinar, you can receive a free strategy session from us. We can kind of talk to you a little bit more about your grant writing, about your skills in grant writing, about what you're hoping to do, and maybe even point you in the right direction if you have additional questions. So I want to make sure that I'm done. It's exactly 8 o'clock. I did a great job at that. So we want to be able to invite you to become a part of GrantMasters. I really appreciate you all participating. If you don't mind, please, before you go, I'm going to send you an email. Please, please, please fill out the evaluation. Let us know how we can do things better. Let us know what you thought about the free session. Let us know if you have any questions about GrantMasters. Our email is here, our website, www.dscallc.net. You will receive an email from me in just a second. So you will have my email. If you have any questions, you can let me know. But I thank you all for participating. I want to make sure that I end at 8 o'clock, as I said I would. You all have a great, great evening, and I will please answer the email and the evaluation shortly. Have a good night.